Good, good morning and welcome to the 9:30 call. We're so happy to have Liz Sweet from Mira with us this morning. And Liz, I will turn things right over to you. If you have slides, you can share your screen. If not, no worries. But if folks have questions, you can add them to chat. We'll be monitoring it. Kim Davenport did share the article about in Worcester, a little girl, and Liz, I'm sure you've seen that. But thanks to Kim for sending that. And again, if folks have questions, please add them to the chat. So I'll monitor that, Liz. You don't have to worry about that. But we're looking forward to your update.
All right. Thanks so much, Amy. Thanks for to all of you for having me back on. I came to speak to you in January. I looked back at my notes, and we've certainly seen so many changes since January of this year. So I thought it might be useful to just talk a little bit about some of the policy changes we've seen, and then talk a little bit about some of the way, some of what we're specifically seeing here in Massachusetts. And then I'll talk a little bit about Know Your Rights information. I think a lot of you have heard about Know Your Rights information now, but I am going to take a couple of minutes, unless I get questions telling me otherwise, to talk a bit more about policies that we could be setting up in organizations. So hopefully some of this is helpful. All right, so just a tiny bit about Mira. We are a 150 plus member organization coalition that really come together to convene, serve, and organize together with our members, community leaders, and allies for the advancement of all immigrants across the Commonwealth and beyond. We place immigrant and refugee voices at the forefront to advocate for the well-being of our communities. And I especially also just like to share our vision because it feels very simple and yet very elusive right now. A vision of a commonwealth where all can thrive, no matter where they came from or how they got here, and that all can fully participate in their community's social, economic, and civic life. So that is our vision and what we work toward here at Mira. Um, I also have taken to, in just any presentations these days, taking a couple of minutes to just talk about immigrants in Massachusetts. Who are they? Where do they come from? Because we have such an amazing, diverse immigrant population here in the Commonwealth. More than 1 in 6 of our residents are foreign born, and that's an even higher percentage of our workforce. Um, Very interestingly, more than half of the folks in Massachusetts who originally came from another country are now naturalized US citizens. So we have so many folks who, want to be on that path to becoming full members of our society, and having all the privileges that come with that. And I think many of you know how incredibly diverse our immigrant population is in some of the countries that we see a lot of folks from. Um, and I'm also just sharing a little bit of the economic data. The reality is that immigrants have huge earnings here in Massachusetts. They earn more than $50 billion a year, pay more than $10 billion a year in federal taxes and $4.5 billion per year in state and local taxes. They're critical to so many parts of our economy. And um, I recently came across a really powerful study, actually, that analyzed, the trends of deportations and what is being threatened by this administration. And that study actually found that the level of mass deportations that they're speaking about could lead to a 4% total reduction in jobs across our state, which is quite a shocking percentage change. So just a little context in thinking about who we are talking about as we go through some of this. So I'm just very briefly going to talk about some of the policy changes that we've seen this year. Um, if people want more information about this, Mira has tons, so you are very welcome to come check out more of our in-depth information. But at this point in the year, and honestly for the past few months, it's felt like we can truly say that our immigration laws have basically been rewritten in this country. And they've been rewritten, without anything actually going through Congress, to change something um, at that level. They've been rewritten through policy changes, through implementation changes, through increasing enforcement, through closing the door on so many programs that have been put in place before. So that includes, especially relevant to us, the ending of so much temporary protected status, which so many workers were on here in Massachusetts, particularly Haitians, some Central Americans, Venezuelans, and some other populations. The CHNV program, which also affected Haitians as well as some other countries, and parole programs. And so just so many people who had lawful status here and lawful permission to work have had that taken away this year. Some of those are very much still in the courts, but that has been this administration's attempt, right, to take away status from so many folks. We've seen student visa holders targeted based on their speech, which I think has been really shocking. We've seen increased fees for so many applications. We've seen so many types of immigration status made harder to obtain or apply for. And one really striking new example of that is for citizenship applications. They've actually recently begun doing what they call neighborhood investigations, that um, immigration will actually be going out and sort of investigating in someone's neighborhood and asking about them when they apply for citizenship, which is just really kind of a creepy tactic. And we don't know what they're going to look for, right? And what might be a reason to deny someone citizenship. Um, so those are just some of the examples of the kinds of changes that we're seeing. And on the other side, I kind of talk about how at the same time that they're making it harder for folks to get and maintain status, lawful status, this huge crackdown is happening around enforcement. They're putting so much money into it. They're escalating so many tactics. And I think lots of us have seen some of these viral videos of, masked folks taking people off the streets, breaking windows, etc. We're just seeing a lot more ICE presence in the streets. We're seeing ICE marked vehicles, and we're seeing them ask for information and access and collaboration with our law enforcement and with so many entities, right? They're seeking to get information from the IRS, from healthcare providers, from so many places. And again, it's a place that people are fighting back and bringing lawsuits, but they are basically looking for, as much information and sharing of resources as possible to carry out their very aggressive goals of deporting so many individuals out of this country.
Liz, I've also seen commercials for people to join ICE.
Yes.
Ads on social media and commercials like after the Red Sox game.
Yes. I was like chilled the first time I heard one
Me
of these
too.
commercials. It's kind of unreal. And the reality is, I mean, the amount of federal funding, this $170 billion, is just an astronomical sum. I mean, it's so much beyond the amount of enforcement funding that they've ever had before. And so it's like they're able to throw money at everything, right? Hire more people, buy more vehicles, buy more toys. I have no idea, what they're doing with all that money, throw up more detention centers. So it's quite chilling. And then, of course, so many of us know that Boston in particular has become a real target. Um, Mayor Wu was called to testify earlier this year. ICE officials have very specifically targeted her. We had that a lot of arrests in June around this particular Operation Patriot, which now apparently they're bringing back in another surge right now. And then, of course, the Department of Justice recently brought a lawsuit against Boston, saying that Boston is trying to be a sanctuary city and not complying with federal immigration law. So far, similar lawsuits in other places around the country have not been successful. The law, we really believe, is on Boston's side on this. But it feels very clear that we are sort of a significant target to them for whatever reason. And it's really unfortunate for our communities that this is happening here. The Wall Street Journal even had an article recently saying that Boston is sort of becoming ground zero for ICE to test like new tactics and then take them to other cities. Um, I'm just sharing a few statistics here. And sorry, I'm trying to move the bar where I see you all so that you can read my stats. Um, but CNN did some really interesting analysis of arrest data from ICE earlier this year, and they actually found that in Massachusetts, these top two statistics are Massachusetts specific, 94% of immigrants are being arrested in the community. So that means like not, coming out of jails or other arrest contexts, right? It's not like someone has been having some kind of contact with law enforcement. They're being arrested out in the streets in the in our communities. Um, and also very striking that 78% of immigrants arrested in Massachusetts this year have no criminal records whatsoever. And so a lot of the narrative around that they're targeting immigrants with crimes, just it's not supported by the data at all. Um, Also, a couple of other just interesting local stats in Boston, at least. And I realize this is, there are folks from outside of Boston, so apologize for the some of this being Boston centric, but with the targeting, it just feels so real right now. Um, we do in Boston have a Trust Act, and that is about how our local police interact with ICE and enforce immigration laws, and that 62% of poll respondents in a Globe poll earlier this summer still view that as strongly favorable and support that. Um, so just a couple of stats to share here about what is actually happening. And I think we all know this, but it's so important to sit with this reality that the result of all of this is just like very deep, widespread fear that is affecting everyone. I've had so many conversations with colleagues here at Mira, for instance, who had been citizens for, 10 or more years who are scared for themselves, and that's not an uninformed fear, right? It's a fear because they see the kinds of ways that folks are being targeted, and that there is some risk for so many folks right now. So we do see rumors that spread so quickly. Um, we see a lot of folks making daily choices, to change parts of their behaviors from normal, because they're so afraid. And we are hearing about more and more folks who are considering self-deportation, which of course has been one of the goals of this administration.
Liz, a couple of questions have come to me in chat. One is around the California bill or law. I don't know if it got passed around masked ICE agents. So have you heard anything kind of comparable from Massachusetts? And around school attendance. We know October 1st is the day where all districts have to report the number of students that they have, and we've heard in communities that they have seen a decline of number of students. So I just wonder, as you're going through, if you could touch on those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the California did pass a law to say that no law enforcement can be masked. We've had some conversation about something similar here. I mean, the challenge is for some of us that are attorneys is that, the state does not have power over ICE agents, right? And so, it's really a little bit more symbolic. Because the state can't actually enforce that. Or, we don't think it's very likely that the state can enforce that. It probably will go up and be litigated and ultimately be decided. So, a question always is for us, like, do we want to put our time into pushing for something like that, which may ultimately be unsuccessful? But we're going to be very interested to see what happens in California.
Sure.
Yeah, appreciate that. And yes, I mean the school attendance has been very, very real. We've heard about so many different cities and neighborhoods where, ICE will be spotted, in a particular area. and the next day school attendance will drop. This is
Right.
like a regular pattern, and it's really challenging, how we all respond to it because, you know, again, people are making choices based on very deep, real fear they have of arrest, of family separation. And it's hard to really reassure them and encourage them to make different choices. Mira does have, and I'll get more to our resources in a minute, maybe I can go there shortly. We do
Thank
have some
you.
resources around specifically in Know Your Rights in educational contexts. So obviously, with all of this, where I want to take our conversation now is like, what can we be doing? And the biggest thing we can be doing is knowing our rights, right? And so this is just like a very simple sort of core set of rights that Mira really tries to uplift right now. Probably most of you know this, but just very briefly, you know, if ICE agents come to your home, you do not have to open the door unless they have a warrant signed by a judge. Similarly, in at work, um, you know, that same sense of privacy attaches, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But if it's a true public place, then you have to be responsive to an agent. It's not safe to just, run off from them, because then you're avoiding being arrested if they are going to arrest you. So we suggest again asking if you're being arrested or detained, and if they say no, then you can leave. If they say yes, people have very basic rights: the right to remain silent, the right to call an attorney, the right to refuse to sign things without attorney consultation. And then one of the most important things right now, especially for anyone with children, is to have an emergency plan and to plan ahead for all of this. To know where your key documents are, to ideally know the phone number for a lawyer or a trusted person who can help you find a lawyer, and especially to be planning around your children. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. If anyone does not know, Mira has a ton of amazing Know Your Rights materials. I can say that because I didn't make most of them, so I'm just proud of my team. Um, I've put the link at the top, which is kind of the main page, miracoalition.org/news/know your rights. If you just go to our website, it's very easy to find this page. And the page is full of resources. We keep making more and more resources. So if you're just about anything you're looking for, you probably can find there. We try to release as much as possible in many languages, especially the languages more commonly spoken here in Massachusetts. And I've listed out, we have materials specifically for educators, for employers, for service providers, for healthcare providers. We have specifically back to school information for families, back to school information for educators. Um, I also highlighted, and I want to talk for a minute about that we have links for family preparedness materials. And I think these are so important, especially with some of the kinds of horror stories that we've been hearing in recent weeks around ICE arresting parents and leaving behind kids, or um, other awful things happening. And so it's so critical. And many of you are in a position where maybe you've already done this even, but getting these resources out to families and sometimes having, sessions to help guide them in making family preparedness plans can be so helpful. Ideally, families are thinking ahead about if they are arrested or detained, who would care for their children, setting up legal documents to allow for that, making sure that schools and other providers, know who is designated. So there's a lot that can be done there that makes a really big difference in that really awful situation that unfortunately is happening to families right now. Um, we I already said we have a lot of multilingual materials, and we also have a number of different samples that we don't put up on our website that if you get in touch with us, we can share simple policies for inside your organization. For instance, sample front desk policies, that type of thing, which I know lots of organizations have already put in place. But if you have not, and you're looking for those, that's something that we can help with.
That's great, Liz. And if folks want to get in touch, you can email me, or if Liz, you're going to put your email, I'm sure you're getting inundated with email. So,
I'm sharing a few emails at the end, so do
okay,
not
great.
worry.
Excellent.
Yes, we will get to that. So I do, as I said, I think it's worth taking just a couple of minutes to talk about internal policies for organizations. And I will go through this fairly quickly. So if anyone wants more of this information, reach back out to us. It's the more that you develop internal policies, the better equipped your organization is going to be, right? And this is especially about what to do, what all staff should know to do if enforcement actually shows up at your door, right? If they come to your workforce, what are you going to do? Um, we have a point here again, reminding you that anything that is public and like in plain view, they have access to, right? And so something to think about if you have not already is like how do you limit what information is publicly available and what information you're actually recording about folks that you serve. If you don't record anything about immigration, then they can't get that information, for example. Um, a big issue, which I already referenced, is private versus public spaces, right? In a public space, any immigration agent or law enforcement can enter, right? And we give some examples of public spaces, right? A parking lot is clearly a public space. A main entrance or a lobby is a public space most of the time, unless, the building is locked, right? Um, so it's really about sort of understanding what is clearly accessible to the public versus what is private and requires some kind of credential or permission for your organization to enter. And those private spaces, importantly, law enforcement can only enter with a warrant or your permission. That's important, right? So if you give them permission, they can enter, but the only way that they can force, and require an entry of you is with a judicial warrant. And so something that we've encouraged lots of organizations to do is better demarcate, between public and private, so that you can enforce this more clearly. Okay. Um, we also encourage, if you have any existing relationship with law enforcement, it's a good opportunity to kind of talk to them and get feedback. And we're encouraging folks to make some kind of guide for staff about what can be shared and not shared with law enforcement. So those are some considerations. If immigration does show up to your organization, some of our recommendations are to ask them for their identification, ask to see a warrant, and if they have a warrant. Um, and, again, you can refuse to provide information and you can assert silence unless there is that warrant. Okay. So how do you know if you have a warrant? A couple of things to look for. You want to look and see that it was issued by a court. There's paperwork that's issued by ICE, right? That is not a warrant, a judicial warrant, right? So you want to look that there's actually a court listed. You also want to look and see if it was signed by a judge. So these are fairly straightforward things to look for. Is it issued by a court? Is it signed by a judge? If not, then it's not a judicial warrant and you do not need to comply. So again, this is like a quick comparison. You can see on the left-hand side at the top, it clearly states district court. And at the bottom, it clearly states that it was signed by a U.S. magistrate judge, right? So that is a judicial warrant you'd have to comply with. On the other side is a document from Homeland Security, which is not signed by a judge or from a court. Okay. Something we also have been suggesting a lot, and again, some of you may have this in place, is that if immigration comes to your organization, to have clear policies and points of contact, right? So, for example, at Mira, we've designated 3 people on our team who are kind of like in order of like who should be called, depending on who's available. And anyone else is going to say they're not personally authorized, to respond. They're going to connect the person to our leadership team member as designated. And this is like a nice thing to just train people to do so they feel a little more comfortable, because that can be really unnerving, to have law enforcement come into your organization. And so knowing like what to say and who to direct them to gives some peace of mind. Um, and then, of course, that person hopefully, knows what these policies are, knows to look for the judicial warrant. And for a lot of us, increasingly, we're identifying an attorney that we can reach, and get advice in this kind of immediate situation. So those are all things that you can think through and prep in advance. Um, so that's a very quick review of that. But again, this is an area where if you reach out to us, we can share more information. And Amy, I see you coming off mute. So are there some more questions?
Well, there's a question about if you could call to verify the warrant. Um,
Unfortunately, there really isn't a way to do that.
right,
It really is you want to be looking again for that it's a court and signed by a judge, and fraud, of either of those things would be a pretty serious offense. So
right,
if they are law enforcement, they should
right,
only be presenting something legitimate.
right. Thanks.
Absolutely. All right. So I did want to very quickly lift up that I've been saying to reach out to Mira, and that is especially true because we are really delighted that we recently got some new funding from United Way of Massachusetts Bay, as part of their United Response Fund, that we are specifically going to be looking more at Know Your Rights programming in early education settings. And so just want to put that out there to you all. This is just a beginning project for us, even though very much building on work that we've been doing this year. And so I'm mostly sharing this to encourage you all that if you are
Great,
hesitating to reach out to us, know that this is an area that we are explicitly working in the coming months. And so your questions and desire for resources are very welcome. Um, I did also just want to say, in addition to all the Know Your Rights work, that Mira is an advocacy organization. And so just want to lift up that in addition to all of this work that we've been talking about, we're actively doing advocacy at the State House here in Massachusetts and trying to do what we can, to push for protections, for our immigrant neighbors. And the two primary things that we've been advocating for this year are the Immigrant Legal Defense Act, which is an attempt to get state funding to provide um, lawyers for folks in immigration just proceedings facing the possibility of deportation and detention, because it leads to a lot more fairness for them in their outcomes if they have counsel. So it's something we can do, that just makes the system a little bit fairer. And then also the Safe Communities Act, which is very much about, ICE has their own resources, and we don't need to put our state resources, our state police, et cetera, toward doing their jobs for them. And so that's really what the Safe Communities Act is about, and saying that we don't want our folks to be actually collaborating to help effectuate arrests, and things like that. So just a little bit more about what Mira is working on. um, we don't have as much power as we'd like to respond to all of this, but we can advocate for some of these things at least. And finally, I'm ending with the contact information that I promised
thank you.
y'all. So I did put my email there, but I bolded who you really should reach out to.
Right, we
um,
appreciate that.
because they are the ones who are doing this work in and day out. We have an amazing training department. They regularly are presenting trainings, and doing Know Your Rights information for all different audiences. And so please reach out to them if you want more information. Again, most all these resources that I've been speaking about are available on our website, including some of the slides that I just went through. You can find them. You can find recordings of Know Your Rights presentations. But if you want something more interactive or tailored to you, by all means, reach out to us. And we are very happy to try to work with all of you and just get this information out to as many places as possible.
Liz, we can't thank you enough. It's funny, I went back too about to see when you were on last, and it was literally like those first few weeks in January when things were even more unsettled than they are now. I guess maybe because we just didn't know, but just really want to appreciate you and your team. We know how incredibly helpful the resources that you've made. I will send you the chat, which is full of love, appreciation, and gratitude for the work that you're doing. And then if you send me the slides, we'll post them on our 9:30 call follow-up folder. And please come back and let us know how we can help you as you're developing these early ed tools. That is such great news and well done to the United Way. Because we know how critical early ed programs are in the lives of families and children, and just to have those resources that are going to be customized, I think are going to be so helpful. So I know you've been doing the circuit, so I appreciate you making time to join us. We had over 80 people on the call this morning. We'll have the recording available too. And if folks continue to have questions, please connect with me. I can connect with Liz or then get to the training department. So thank you so much for joining us this morning, Liz. All right. Well, tomorrow is Friday, so we don't have a call, but we will be back in action on Monday. I have no idea who's coming, but I know that we're booked through October. So we're taking and I'm at the Hunt Institute, and someone said, "Oh, are you still doing that call once a week?" I said, "Oh no, we're still doing it 4 days a week." So thanks to the 9:30 callers for continuing to show up and to Liz for joining us this morning. We'll see you next week.